Madam Ambassador, thank you very much for being at Euronews Albania in what makes me very happy, that is your first interview at Euronews Albania here in this country. 1 month after your arrival in Albania, actually, the country went into quarantine mood due to coronavirus. How was the experience of working under such restrictions?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me here. It's a real pleasure to be here. I've heard about you, of course, by your reputation, and so it's great to be here. I love being in Albania. I got here at a time when people said it's the worst time because there had just been the earthquake, and then shortly after I got here, the corona pandemic took place. But to me, from what I have seen, this is the best time because I think for me, I got to see what Albania and the Albanian people are truly like. And what I saw was courage and perseverance and hope. I have to say, you know, we've done fairly well in managing the situation. So I'm very pleased to be here.
I've also noticed that you are very active on social networks.
Yeah.
Why did you choose to communicate directly with the Albanian people?
Because I want to know what people are thinking. And as much as I love the reports that I get, as much as I value the information that I get from my staff, I really wanted to hear directly from people. And I see social media not just as a way for me to tell other people what I'm thinking, but for other people to tell me. I actually do read the comments. Sometimes it's a little bit toxic, but I read them anyway.
And how is the general feedback that you get from the communication, from people talking to you?
Very positive, very positive. What I've really noticed here is that the affection that Albanians have towards the United States and Americans is so genuine. And I hope that the Albanian people know that the feeling is mutual. We also look at Albania as a real friend and a very special friend.
And actually, you showed that you were a friend. You helped Albania during coronavirus crisis with some medical needs and infrastructure. What is the total amount of financial help that you already have given? And is US planning on further economic help?
Yeah. Well, the United States, as you know, is the world's largest contributor to humanitarian and health and other issues. And so over the last 20 years, we've provided $140 billion worth of aid around the world. For the coronavirus alone, in the last few weeks, we have released $900 million. Of that, about 1.2 million so far has come to Albania. There will be more. And I hope that people know that the 1.2 is building on a lot more. Over the years, we have provided Albania with about $693 million in assistance. And we're happy to do that because, you know, as you say here, a friend in need is a friend indeed. And what I notice is that this isn't a one-way street. So some of the comments in social media, when I read it, often focus on the United States, you know, has always given to Albania. Thank you for taking care of us. And I want people to know that we feel that Albania has also taken a lot of action to take care of us and to take care of others. And so, you know, with this coronavirus issue, when I saw 90 Albanian medics going to the center of the disease in Italy, I found this to be an incredibly brave and moving gesture. And so for me, now that I'm here, I feel part Albanian. I feel proud.
Also, there is help, but at the same time, accountability.
Yeah.
And that's what Albanian people have always wanted from US, actually. They have looked up at you, at the ambassador here, to tell the truth about Albania, about the accountability of government. So let me ask you about your evaluation of how this government has behaved in terms of the measures taken, the fact that the natural disaster was extended till 23rd of June, and the criminal law was strengthened in order to punish the infected people who were breaching self-isolation, which actually was somehow raised concerns by 30 human rights organizations, and they believed it was a disproportionate and a violation of individual rights and freedom.
Yeah. I think the results speak for themselves in terms of how the government has handled the coronavirus issue. I would say that the government deserves credit, but I also think there is credit due to others, including the Albanian people, because it wouldn't have happened had the vast majority of Albanian people not complied with the very stringent measures. So as a result of everybody's contributions, I think the rate of infection and the number of deaths was kept at a pretty low rate. On the issue of accountability, I think that is the heart of democracy and the rule of law, and you're right to focus on it. But it's not for the US Embassy or for the US government to demand that of the Albanian government. That is something that the Albanian people have to demand. So for example, with me as a representative of the US government at our embassy here, at any minute, I am prepared to answer how we are spending American taxpayer dollars in the embassy. And I think that the Albanian people should have the same expectation of their own government. You should demand answers. You should ask questions.
The problem is getting answers, Madam Ambassador.
And you have to keep pressing for it.
And you have to have strong institutions who work and who value transparency.
Correct.
Do you think that's the case in Albania?
I think that there is always room for improvement, and I think that there are some positive steps being taken. And my expectation is that this will continue. And certainly the United States of America will support those efforts.
Was the change of criminal law to any concern for the US Embassy?
I won't comment specifically on it, but what I will say is that the process of getting to the law was, I think, a model in that the government proposed something, the opposition voiced their opinions, civil society also made clear their concerns, the president had an opinion, Parliament debated, they passed it, the president made further changes, and then it was adopted. To me, this is a model of how the legislative process in a democracy should occur.
And talking about this climate that you mentioned, the model, political actors seemed during the COVID-19 crisis to work together jointly by avoiding fighting, the usual fight politically that they do, even in hard times. Do you think this climate is sustainable? And also the Albanian leaders have the capacity to put people's interests above political parties' interests?
Yeah. They have shown through their own actions that it is possible. And I hope that the Albanian people will continue to demand better behavior of their leaders. They have shown that when an issue is important, at a moment like the corona pandemic, they can put politics aside, they can focus on the greater good, and they can actually talk to each other in a civilized manner and produce a result that is meaningful. And I hope that they will continue to do this. There are other issues ahead of us that will require that kind of cooperation and leadership, real leadership, including the election reform, continuation of justice reform, and Albania's integration into the European Union. That will require leadership, and it will require leaders to decide that they cannot afford to keep playing politics as usual.
And I hope that will happen, although we will come to the cooperation and the reforms a bit later during the interview. Special Anti-Corruption and Anti-Organized Crime Body, SPAC, finally was established with some considerable delay. And also currently is investigating on some public procurement from the Defense Minister and the Health Ministers on the public tenders that the opposition has called they were secret tenders, although the government has denied they were secret. What do you think about the transparency of government decisions in this crisis during COVID-19? and also about transparency on public spending as well.
Yeah. As I mentioned before, I think governments have an obligation to be able to explain to their taxpayers exactly how tax money is being used.
Do you think this obligation has been fulfilled so far?
I think that's for SPOC to decide. They will take a look at the facts, and I'm looking forward, like everyone else in Albania, to hearing what the results are. But there is a process in place, and it is the correct thing for SPOC to decide that issue. It's not for me to decide.
And let's talk about, let's not hide when we have the elephant in the room, justice reform. Let's talk about how is the current evaluation that you have about the implementing of the ongoing justice reform.
Yeah. So justice reform is absolutely necessary, and I think everybody agreed on that. In 2016, the popular demand for justice reform was so great that politicians had to adopt these reforms. They did the right thing. It's something to be celebrated. There are three parts to justice reform. You have to have the legal framework, then you have to start building the institutional capacity for it, and then finally, this can also happen in tandem, you have to implement the law and you have to get the institutions to work. I think that people are right to be a little bit impatient about this. We've seen the first part done. We have the laws in 2016. We have most of the institutions in place, with the exception now of the director of the National Bureau of Investigation and the Constitutional Court, which is a big deal. I mention all of this to point out that as impatient as we are, there has also been real progress. And I say this to say you should continue to be impatient. You should continue to push. And from my point of view, it is now up to leaders to deliver. It is now up to them to show political will to establish the Constitutional Court. It is up to the judges to begin to show that the courts are functioning. And I think we've already seen that. In the past week, the High Court issued some decisions, and we are beginning to see the backlog of cases being reduced, and vetting is continuing. So there is action, but I'm with the Albanian people. It's time for a renewed push to make progress here.
Madam Ambassador, how would you respond to critics that say that the US and EU have pushed for justice reform that is defective, that has problems, that actually has created Albania in a situation, unusual situation, unprecedented, with no justice, with no high court, no constitutional court, and actually they do blame internationals for putting pressure on Albanian political leaders. How would you respond to that?
I would say that something like justice reform is extremely difficult. It's complicated and it's imperfect. But from what I can see, the basic elements are there, and it is up to all the players to begin implementing in a real way.
Albanian people see you as a guarantor for this reform, especially, and they believe in what you do is the right thing. Can you tell to Albanians that what we have done with the justice reform so far was the best we could have delivered?
I think that no one should ever claim perfection. It's not possible. But what I can tell you is that for the American government, justice reform in Albania remains a priority. And for me personally, it remains a priority. And I plan to give everything I have to make this real. It will mean that there will be some frustrations. I fully expect that, because there are some who don't want it to happen. There are also issues of capacity. But what I can say is that I will make my best effort. Everybody else around me will make my best effort. And I think that it's now up to political leaders to show their seriousness in making this happen.
I'm going to give it the try, although I know diplomatically you cannot answer this, but do you know who doesn't want it?
I think that there are many who don't want it.
And you're still working with them?
I think, there are many who don't want it. I work with a wide range of people, and I will continue to do so.
Madam Ambassador, you also met on April 13th with the head of Justice Appointments Council, which is the High Court judge as well, Mr. Ardian Dvorane, for whom the President of the Republic has asked the High Judicial Council to dismiss due to mandate expiration since 2014. And the High Judicial Council has asked for the opinion of Obdat and Euralius before deciding on the case. What is your opinion on this matter?
I think the courts should make use of all the resources available to them, including technical advice. But ultimately, they have to follow the law. And ultimately, they have to show that they're able to make decisions on a basis that reflects independence and integrity. They should not allow any external factors to interfere with the decision-making process. Again, as I said before, everyone is free to express their opinion. I can express it, you can express it, anybody can. But at the end of the day, the value of having a court in this framework of judicial reform is that they operate with independence and integrity.
So no matter what the opinion of the Obdat of Euralius, it's still the High Judicial Council responsibility to take the decision?
Absolutely.
Because they may say, as an alibi, this is what the internationals want.
It's time to stand up. Stand up on your own 2 feet. Show the Albanian people that you can function. It's time.
Also, what is your evaluation on the reforms? We have a list of reforms to fulfill, starting from the electoral reform and other important reforms in order to start negotiations officially with the EU. It's a long-awaited process to start, and actually we have done our part, which usually was problematic, but EU as well has had its own struggles. But let's focus on our problems. How do you see the process of the electoral reform so far? Yesterday we had statements from opposition and majority that seemed to be a bit set back from the initial goal to approve a consensual reform.
I think rather than focusing on every single step, we do need to step back a little bit and look at the big picture. In the big picture, what I see is that the opposition, whether they are in parliament or outside of parliament, have all agreed to sit at the table. It's now the responsibility of everyone at the table, whether they are in the minority or the majority, to really listen to each other's ideas. And then to take those ideas, take the advice of the OSCE and ODIHR, and try to come up with a set of reforms that are really meaningful. This is really the time to show what they have. So I think over the next 6 months, there are going to be some important decisions that will have to be made, some important negotiations that will have to be closed, including on electoral reform, and I'm looking forward to seeing the results. But it's good that they are sitting at the same table, and I think they feel a little bit of pressure to come up with a meaningful result.
Going back to the justice reform, actually, I wanted just to make sure if in the meetings that you have had with the Albanian political actors and factors, has you, in the capacity of the US ambassador, made clear to them that they should renounce the desire to appoint judges or prosecutors?
The law is pretty clear, in my mind, as to how justice reform should proceed and how judges should be appointed. Where there are questions, I think they are appropriately referred to the Venice Commission, and they should be ultimately referred to the Constitutional Court. That's who gets to decide the interpretation of the law.
Which is not in place right now.
Correct. So we have to fix this problem. And when I say we, I mean everybody in Albania, but in particular, the leaders of Albania. It's not for me to fix. I can speak for the United States of America and say our expectation and our desire on behalf of our Albanian friends is that the Constitutional Court should exist. But ultimately, it's for the Albanian people to demand of their leaders that they take action. And it's the responsibility of leaders to be responsive to what their people are asking of them.
Madam Ambassador, do you think the U.S. supports a certain majority or government in order to protect stability, as some critics say? Is this the case?
I think we work with every government that is in place, that is legitimately elected and legitimately in place. That's our job. We don't discriminate. But regardless of elected governments, our relationship is with the people of Albania. It's with Albania as a country, it's not a specific party. So I make a point of communicating and reaching out and touching as many people as I possibly can. And you asked earlier why I am so active on social media. It's for that reason, because the relationship is a very broad one. And the great cooperation that we have with the Albanian government is one element of it, but it's just one element. And I appreciate the fullness of the relationship.
And to go back to the electoral reform, do you think the parties will respect the deadline, 31st of May, of approving it?
I hope so. You know, the European community will be looking at this issue very carefully as a first indicator of how well Albania will be able to comply with the 15 requirements ahead of the start of negotiations. So I think they're under a little bit of pressure here to produce.
Are you putting pressure on them?
I've expressed to them my hope that they will do their jobs. I think they feel the pressure from the Albanian people.
Talking about, I believe, and this is a personal opinion now, that with the U.S., Albanians, the people of Albania, have always had a very healthy relationship.
Yes.
An alliance that sometimes would not even justify it. In these 30 years of post-communism, even in insane times, Albanians loved America. And we have always loved this strategic partnership with the US. But somehow we haven't seen it materialized in more interest expressed in the country. For instance, let me give you some examples. Chinese investors are present in Albania now in key sectors such as oil or international airport. Russian investors, they are bringing grain, although there are some restrictions now, but they have this capacity to have the policy as with the gas. And Albania seems not ready to deal with it. Where are the American interests in Albania? When will we see some American capital in this country?
So I will disagree with you that there is evidence, that you don't see evidence. I see lots of evidence of the strength of the U.S.-Albania relationship. Even before I arrived here, I said that my top 3 priorities when I come to Albania will be to strengthen our defense relationship so that Albania is an even stronger and more capable NATO ally than it already is. Secondly, that we would work to support Albania's development as a democratic nation. So the rule of law, anti-corruption, justice reform, election reform, all of those issues. And then finally, to look for opportunities to expand economic and trade relations between the United States and Albania. These 3 things are connected. They're connected because they require transparency and adherence to the rule of law. So what I try to emphasize with leaders here, those who make the rules, whether it's politicians or members of the judiciary, is that business decisions are going to get made on things like whether contracts are enforced. Why would I put my money into a contract when I'm not sure if the courts are fair, if I'm not sure that the process for applying is transparent, if I'm not sure that someone else isn't going to do a favor for another company? So you need transparency, you need a process, and you need some guarantees of legal enforcement. So once we have those pieces, I'm sure that there is going to be lots of interest. In the meantime, I would point out that the American Chamber of Commerce is very active in Albania, now more so than ever. And you may have seen, for example, that the American company Coca-Cola made some contributions for the fight against COVID. So I think American companies, the American presence is so pervasive here that it's almost like air and we don't notice it, but it's here. And what I see is that over the course of the last 100 years, at critical moments, the Albanian people and the American people have always chosen each other. 100 years ago, when the great powers were trying to divide Albania and make it disappear, the United States listened to Albania and said, no, Albania has a right to exist. 90 years later, we were there again when Albania and the Albanian people were under attack. When you rejected communism, we were there to support, and on and on. So we have a long and I think wonderful relationship together of mutual admiration, mutual help, mutual interest. You know, you asked about others who are trying to get in on the game. And I don't think that I need to give any Albanians a lecture about all of the others. You know very well what the history is from your own experience. And my expectation is that the United States and Albania will always continue to choose each other first, because we have so much more to gain and so much more to do together.
So I trust this is on us now to improve the climate for investments, and then the American capital. The American capital will come. What are the sectors that the U.S. investors may be most interested in Albania?
I think infrastructure and energy are always of interest. There are going to be regular, consumer goods. I think the coronavirus issue will affect trade for many countries and many regions around the world. But there are opportunities here. And I am hoping that the legal framework will be in such a state and the operation of it will be in such a state as to demonstrate to American investors that Albania is a good bet.
We mentioned civil society, but there is another pillar of the democracy, the media.
Yeah.
What do you expect? What do you want from the Albanian media? What do you think they should improve?
I think the media should continue to provide real information that is well researched and to provide both sides of the story so that people can make up their minds. And I do hope that journalism in Albania becomes the strong pillar that it is in every democracy. Sometimes journalists ask questions that make people uncomfortable, as you did today, but it's your job, and I respect that. You have a role to play, I have a role to play, and they're important roles, I think. And if we don't play them to the best of our ability, the entire project suffers. And so I have nothing but respect for Albania's journalists, and I've met many of them already, and I'm looking forward to meeting more.
Ambassador Yuri Kim, it was a privilege talking to you. Thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you so much.